How does it achieve a reduction in emissions? Simply by burning all of the fuel. Our bodies are made up of greater than 90% of water. So how come it doesn't go down the drain when you have a shower? Because our bodies are held together with a molecular structure and a magnetic field, which is what our planet is all about. We neutralise the magnetic structure that holds molecules together in this particular case. By neutralising that magnetic field, the molecules let go of each other, which means that you get a greater coverage of oxygen to each hydrocarbon molecule. The result of that is similar to taking a phone book and trying to burn it. It'll take you forever. Or putting it through a paper shredder. You're doing that in a physical sense. Here you're doing it in the molecular sense. So you're neutralising the magnetic field that holds those molecules together. Once you have neutralised the magnetic field, they separate. Obviously, we'll have a greater coverage of oxygen to hydrocarbon once it enters the combustion chamber, which means you get a greater burn, giving you that result of a phone book being burnt through after it's been shredded. The magnetic field that is housed in one end of the unit will not lose its magnetic strength more than 1% in 20 years. So we can always be certain that the magnetic field that we use to separate the hydrocarbon molecules will remain for at least 20 years. In terms of having the experience now, being in business for 25 years, we've still got units sold at the beginning are still working in the field. There are aspects of the Powerburn unit that I did invent, but the whole of the concept itself was invented by a British scientist on behalf of the Air Force during the Second World War. The British sent Spitfires to Russia to fight with the Russians against Hitler. And when they flew from England to Russia, they, as a matter of course, refueled the aircraft and then found that they were either running very rough, badly, or wouldn't run at all. And it was the low-grade fuel that they were using in Russia that didn't meet the standards that the Merlin engines in the Spitfires were designed to use. So this scientist believed that he could produce a catalytic converter that would assist that process. And what he did, he produced pretty much this product in a different size and form, but the technology is the same. And that's how they got the Spitfires through the war on Russian fuel. I came to know about it on a trip to England. I got more interested in it in 1989 over the next few days and went to pursue this technology and brought it back to Australia, worked with it for several months before we decided to wear the cost of redeveloping it and producing a product, which is what we did. Simply by burning all the fuel. By burning all the fuel, there's no residue left in the combustion chamber. People think that engines wear out through constant running. It's common knowledge that taxis, it's not unusual to find a taxi that's done 1 million miles. But your average family car would never do 1 million miles. And pretty much the reason for that is that the taxi never is allowed to get cold. So if the man's running a good business, that taxi engine is warm all the time. So you don't get an expansion and contraction of metals. So that's why they last so much longer. With a Powerburn unit, we burn all of the fuel, which means that there's no residue from unburnt fuel left in the engine. Engines don't wear out just by themselves. Well, they do, but over a very, very long period. What wears them out is the carbon buildup in engines that contracts and expands as the engine is shut down and started again, allowed to get cold, started hot, started cold, allows that carbon to dislodge from under the head and on top of the piston. When it dislodges, mostly when the engine is cold, that carbon gets down between the piston and the bore, and it rubs backwards and forwards as the piston is going up and down. It's grinding that carbon up against the walls of the bore by the piston. When it's turned it into a very fine talcum powder, it finishes up down in the sump in your oil, contaminating your oil. But it does more than that. Once it's in the oil, then your oil is to lubricate the main bearings in the engine, the conrods and main bearings, but they're contaminated with very hard carbon. And now you've got that carbon in the oil and it's grinding away, wearing your engine out. So, no carbon, no wear. Burn all the fuel, no carbon. You've burnt it, you've got maximum energy out of it, and that increases the life of your engine. If you burn all of the fuel, there's none going down the exhaust. So you get benefit from every drop of fuel that goes into your engine. So you get, by burning it completely, you're not only getting a greater mileage, but you're also getting more power out of your engine. So if you had all of the vehicles in China running on Powerburn, there would be a reduction in emissions great enough to be able to be noticed. Let's assume that this is the feed line of fuel that comes from the fuel tank to the fueling system of the engine. And this will be tucked in behind the engine and between the engine and the firewall somewhere. So you simply take that fuel line and cut it. So let's assume this is your fuel line. We'll cut that fuel line. And each end will go to the end of the unit. Obviously now you've got some leftover hose. You don't have to cut that hose off. Just loop it somewhere and then take these caps out that protect the ends of it. Screw one of these hose tails into each end. There's one there and the other one is screwed into there. Make sure that the fuel flow is in the right direction, so the fuel is running in that direction. We put a hose clamp on the hose, push the hose onto the tail at that end, the same at the other end. And for all intents and purposes, this is how your unit will look fitted in the vehicle. As I said, it'll probably be tucked in behind the engine and between the firewall. So this is the feed line from your tank to this end. This one continues on to the fueling system of the car. Once it's installed, you don't touch it anymore. You don't need to service it. You don't need to do anything. Leave it there. In fact, most people really forget that they've got it in their car after a while. Here is the feed line, the fuel coming from the fuel tank into the unit. It passes through the other side. We'll now just tighten up the hose clamp. And once it's installed, it can then lay down and find its own level where it wants to hang behind the engine. This one's been installed for some 15 years and it's perfectly happy there. the quickest and easiest way to get visible and proof positive evidence of it is at the exhaust. Now you'll see in this vehicle here that's been running on a Powerburn unit for 200,000 kilometres. And if you have a look at this exhaust pipe here, that is clean. I'm going to put my finger inside and run it around to show you that that pipe is absolutely clean. Now this is the vehicle that you arrived in, fairly new. Does it have an exhaust? Here it is. I'll put my finger inside there and that's what you see. That is unburnt fuel. I'll do it again. And look at that. That's unburnt fuel, carbon. And that's, now this vehicle has a catalytic converter on the exhaust and it still has soot out the exhaust.